Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome all of you to our Great Books course here at the Wisdom School of Ubiquity University. It's a course that I've loved to teach since the very beginning, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Books have always been a very important part of my life. I grew up as a little boy reading books voraciously in a little missionary school out in the island of Taiwan. Back in those days, there was no television and we didn't have radio. So books were the one source of constant pleasure, activating the imagination from all sorts of vectors and realms. Great books are great because they endure over time. They deal with noble themes. They transform lives. That's what constitutes a great book. There have been millions of books written, but only a handful are called great. What we encounter in a great book is an intelligence not our own that challenges our worldview, catalyzes a change in consciousness, and opens up new pathways for renewal and service to the greater good. We started this year by contemplating the great book authored just before he died by George Orwell, 1984, a book that has shaped global perception about totalitarian regimes and how love can ignite revolution and how love betrayed can catalyze the destruction even of thine own self. This month, we turn to perhaps the master storyteller of them all, Shakespeare. It's probably true that no playwright in history has had the versatility, the depth, the wisdom of William Shakespeare. Possibly the Greek tragedians, if you remember Aeschylus or Sophocles, Euripides. Shakespeare took many of his stories from these ancient Greek playwrights, from Plutarch, the great Greek Roman playwright of the 2nd century AD. And today we're very privileged to have Peggy Rubin. We all know her and love her through her courses in the work with Jean Houston, her presence in Chartres year after year, and more recently with Banafsheh Sayad and Anne Baring, Ruth Cunningham as a curator of our Madonna Rising course that we're doing each August on an ongoing basis as part of the Chartrian Academy. She's a Shakespearean actress. She's spent her life immersed in Shakespearean plays and poetry. So I'd like to now introduce Peggy Rubin, who will talk to us about Shakespeare and his great play, The Tempest. Peggy.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's wonderful to be in your presence as a great magician that you are, and to be sharing my love and care for the great magician who is William Shakespeare. And I need also to say thank you to you for being here, those of you who are present today in this wondrous and strange time we live in. I also want to begin by saying that my love for William Shakespeare is a lifelong devotion, and I owe everything I know to 1,000 other people, directors, teachers, actors, historians, scholars, friends, allies, enemies, all of it. We all come to create within ourselves our very own William Shakespeare. And I'm so pleased to be sharing my beloved master, William Shakespeare, with you today. a little bit. And I want to think, I began this process of thinking how to do this. And a friend of mine, who's a wonderful, wonderful artist, suddenly showed up with an image of both a great magician and something she calls the Renaissance of heart. And that's what we're doing. We're looking for a Renaissance of heart. This is the beautiful Denise Kester's work, and I saw it again, and I thought, that's the magician there. That's the one doing it. And her words about it, I am emerging and merging with something new and uncertain. And that's what Shakespeare does. And that's what he puts on the stage. We never know how things will turn out. And no great magician, even with enormous power, ever knows how things are going to turn out. He simply puts them on the stage and there they go. And from then on, it feels like I'm falling, but I'm not. It is my shifting point of view that is bending and expanding. And as many of you know, Shakespeare participated in what I think of as the English Renaissance, at a time when the people of England began to think of themselves as English, and their country as a united country, and all of them seeking a renewal. And one of the things that two very great friends of William Shakespeare did for the world is create a book. We're here to talk about great books, and this is one of the greatest. And this is one of the title pieces for Ben Jonson's long poem of praise that exists in the first folio of the collection of William Shakespeare's books. And I want us to honor the memory of my beloved, this is Ben Jonson speaking, and also me, the author, Master William Shakespeare, and what he hath left us. Now, before we go to what he hath left us, Mary Beth, I want to call your attention to the word author, and it's capitalized in the folio. Now, this is a collection of Shakespeare's plays, created and curated, as Jim would say, by two friends who were members of the company that he had been part of for many years. So the devotion of friends to collect the works that were, the plays at that time were not literature. They were things that you did because you got a show this afternoon. It's the beginning of an entertainment industry, and you've got a show. So we got to have a show in a week about this and so forth. So Shakespeare, for much of his life, was what they called a jobbing playwright, and the snobbish people of his time, and even much later, thought that plays were not literature. They were plays, and many scholars and gentlemen refused to have copies of plays in their library because they were of a much lower thing. But Shakespeare's friends and fellow players recognized and went to the enormous process. It took a year just to print it. They printed some probably 750, 800 copies, and it's a big book, and you only printed holy things in big books. So they are making a statement. And in this beginning of Ben Jonson's beautiful long poem to Shakespeare, he makes a point by saying it's an author. He's not just a playwright, friends. This is an author, and this is a great book. So let's see what he hath left us, according to Ben Jonson. And I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, because the words of Shakespeare exist in the human body, and they come through the human throat and the human voice, and they need to be heard and they need to be spoken. So I'm going to speak. I'm going to ask you to read along with me if you can. This is in honor of a great book. Okay. Soul of the age, the applause, delight, the wonder of our stage, my Shakespeare rise. And we are dealing with my Shakespeare. Everybody has their own Shakespeare, but this one's mine. I will not lodge thee by Chaucer or Spenser, or bid Beaumont lie a little further to make thee a room. Thou art a monument without a tomb, and art alive still, while thy book doth live, and we have wits to read and praise to give. So this is where it began, and right after, let's see, I think it was, there were 2 folios printed, and then one in 1623. That's 7 years after Shakespeare died. And then there was another one in 32. It was a very popular thing, and people began to read. And then it was much later, when the theaters were closed during the Commonwealth, and there was no monarchy or theater. And that 40-year period turned the English people to readers. So long as thy book doth live, and we have wits to read and praise to give. So I'm here to sing praise in every way I know to Master William Shakespeare, my beloved William Shakespeare. And the first book, the Tempest, which is what we're going to be playing with today, is the first thing printed in that book. And it's the only way we still have a copy. It had never been printed before. 18 of the books in that great book had never been printed or known. So we only have the Tempest because his friends made sure it was in that great book. And we're going to take a voyage with the magician who is William Shakespeare. And I want you to have the sense that that's what we're doing and getting ready to climb aboard a boat, because seas and boats and ships and islands are part of the great mystery and magic we will be encountering as we play with the Tempest. And we're going to go now to the first performance of the Tempest that we know of. So I'm going to ask you to join me in the theater. Now, this is a relatively intimate theater because it's in the banqueting hall of the Whitehall Palace. This is before King James I, right? And his whole court. So you've got on your best dresses and best doublet and hose, and you join the company of people ready and eager to watch this brand new play by William Shakespeare. So please join the crowd, and I'm going to ask you to listen in on some gossip, all right? So we're going to talk, you will hear people talking about the title, which is The Tempest, which means, oh, it's got to do with one of those big storms. And have any of you read the paper, the letter written by William Strachey about that enormous storm and that huge troop of people, 9 ships, 500 people set sail from England in the spring of 1609, remember, a couple of years ago, and they set sail for the New World to Jamestown colony in Virginia, the place, that territory that's named for our great queen, who died some years ago. But anyway, we're here in the court and we're talking about that storm. And the main ship, which is set, they were trying to bring help and care to the colonists, the few colonists that were at Jamestown. And so it was a great body of people who were traveling. And when the storm, the Tempest hit, the big leading ship, the Sea Venture, was separated and lost, and everybody believed it was lost at sea. And you know what? There was a miracle, because somehow they got themselves to this island, and they put this huge ship for that time between 2 rocks, and it turned out that there was the place called Bermuda. Have you heard of that? Bermuda. And you know what? They have started a colony there because everybody survived this far. Now, I have a friend who has written from the colonies, and I had word that they are having a desperate time. And indeed, they did have a desperate time, but this was a miraculous thing. And the wonderful being named Strachey, who wrote the account of it, is something that we know Shakespeare must have heard, because there was a miracle thing that happened on board that ship. And that was that they couldn't see anything. They couldn't see the sun. They couldn't see the moon at night. They couldn't see the stars. They saw nothing. But suddenly there was a tiny blue light a light that began to flash, and it flashed over the sails and over here and over there and over where. And it was a wonderful thing that they thought of, that we in 1611 still think of as something called St. Elmo's fire, and it gives us hope. And it may be that it is a visitation from the gods. But anyway, they did make it finally to this new colony of Bermuda, and everyone survived, at least that shipwreck. So that's part of the gossip that's going on, because there is a deep connection between the court of James and that new colony in what was the New World called Jamestown. And some of the inspiration for this play came from that remarkable story of their survival. So this is the Tempest. And we're going to have a look now, if you will, at some of the themes. Jim talked about the everlasting themes that are in great books. And this, in just the Tempest, in this play, the whole theme that Shakespeare works with much of his life, which is power. Who is worthy to carry it, and how, and who steals power from others. So that's part of the theme of this particular play. There are storms not just at sea, but also on land. There's a huge loss or sense of loss. And there's great magic afoot, because the magician Prospero is in charge, as the magician Shakespeare is in charge of the whole story. And there is enormous mystery. Nobody knows what's happening. Nobody knows what's going to happen next, including those of us in this first audience. We will hear the cries of freedom over and over and over. And we will feel, even as people in the year 1611, feel some of the concerns. We too have read Michel de Montaigne's study of indigenous people and the colonies, and what do they mean, and what does it mean to declare yourself the owner of a piece of land that there are strange beings living in. So this whole colonial piece, this colonist piece, and the need for freedom are the great cries of this play, coming through many different voices. There is the presence absolutely of divine providence, and Prospero will tell us that in just a few moments, about how it is that divine providence brought him to this island, this desert, strange, bizarre, music-filled island. And what else is there? Prospero has been exiled to this island with his baby daughter. And this happened in the play 12 years ago, because his deeply loved brother, younger brother, Prospero was the Duke of Milan, he tells us, of Milan. And he, in love with books and in love with ancient writings that tell of magic and power, had decided after some time to give over most of the governing power of his country to his younger brother, his much loved younger brother. And the younger brother took that power and began to make his own way in his own nature. And before very long, he had declared that his brother was no longer competent, and he made alliance with the king of Naples. And together they brought in an army and brought Prospero, his baby girl, to the sea, and took them out to sea and left them in a leaky boat with no provision except for one gift, one series of gifts from a very special person that we'll meet in a moment. So the big lie is part of the thing that happens in any study of power. And we're living with it. I'm shifting now the time travel back to our day. We're living with that today. And there is the whole desire for revenge. This is another, and those of us in the audience will say, I wonder if this is another one of his revenge plays, because they take place with a desire for revenge that is so compelling that it is impossible to imagine. And yet, things happen, and they open a pathway to something rich and strange, as one of the songs in the play tell us. One of the other themes is nature versus nurture. Again, this is influenced by Montaigne on whether how you were born or how you were taught. What makes the greatest difference? And what else is there present in the Tempest? Everywhere music. I wish I could have the music that's there. It is the most musical of all the plays, and they're great singers. There is a brief mention, a very beautifully sweet mention of what was once a golden age, a time when nobody had to work, nobody connived against anybody else. And for just a few moments, there is a sense on this island, this desert island, that there is also present a burgeoning renaissance of some kind of golden age. And it is, as we come back to the 21st century, I'm asking you to use your imagination. We won't get a golden age, but we can get a vision of what might happen. And some of it will be made clearer as we traverse this play. And of course, this is Shakespeare. So his beautiful young daughter who was shipped with him on this leaky bark, and by divine providence reached this island. She was 3 at the time, and now she is 15, a young woman. And something happens. And as it happens, there are also enormous numbers of ordeals that have to do with a profound, mysterious initiation. There is the great gift of compassion. And ultimately, there is a pathway to forgiveness. I'd like to show you a traditional image of Prospero. Now, this is his island, his great cave. We have no idea where that island is, although lots of people have lots of opinions about it. But he has been brought to this island, you see, and one of the reasons I wanted to do The Tempest for Great Books is because the book matters so totally in this play. This is Prospero's great book of magic, and his spells and everything he loves and knows about literature is in that book. And he also has his magic staff, which he can raise and bring power to the world. And here is also another image that an artist had of what that must have felt like. So here is the shipwreck itself. It's going on in the first scene of the play. We have a wonderful part of the gossip of the theater is that sometimes with Shakespeare's plays, you can read the first 12 lines and get most of the themes. So in this play, the play begins with the word, the master of the ship. It's a sailing ship, as you saw those images. And he says, bosun, and bosun says, here, master, what cheer. And so we have here the sailors doing their best. And then because it is the ship, that it happens that the King of Naples and his brother and Prospero's wicked brother are all on board this ship. Again, divine providence has had her way, and they are sailing from Carthage, which is where the young princess Claribel was married to the king of Tunis, of Carthage. They're on their way back to Naples, all right? So by divine providence, this ship has come close to this island, and by his great power, and Prospero tells us in the first scene that by divine providence, they have arrived at this island and lived at this island, and he has now in the zenith of an auspicious star, and he's got to take action now. Number one, because his daughter is grown and she is actually a duchess and deserves better than living on a desert island. And so he's got to get her off that island somehow. So he's under an enormous pressure. All of Shakespeare's characters have some kind of dynamic pressure that causes them to be ever more creative. It's one of his standards of the power of creation. So here is this gigantic storm raging, and here you can see, because we don't see her till a little bit later in this presentation, but that's also a picture of somebody else's idea of Prospero, and that's Miranda, his beautiful 15-year-old daughter, and the absolute epitome of compassion, because here's this gigantic storm, and on the storm the king, and they're either at prayers hoping to make it safely through, or they are caught by St. Elmo's fire and jumping into the water like the young prince does, all of them, but they have no idea of what's happening, but of course it's all Prospero's magic. And so Miranda, with this great burst, and this is how we see her first, she comes bursting onto the stage saying, if by your art, my dearest father, you've done this, please, 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 please allay it. We can't handle these, the people were crying. This is a great vessel. Anyway, she does this lovely, lovely speech, and I'm going to do the forbidden thing, which is to paraphrase Shakespeare here, because this is when Prospero realizes he's got to tell her who she is. He's raised her up and trained her beautifully, and nature and nurture have combined to create a perfect woman, and that's Miranda. But he needs to tell her the story. And so he tells her about the betrayal of his brother and how they were brought on this shore, out to this desert island, and what has happened since then. And there is somebody here who is a non-traditional Prospero, and that's the person I'm going to be honoring next. This is the great actress of Canada named Martha Henry, and 2 years ago, this is the most recent production that I've seen of The Tempest. She'd been a mainstay of the Stratford Company since the 70s, and I learned from a friend recently that her first role at Stratford was as Miranda in The Tempest. But here she is Prospero. She's 80 years old, and she is honored by the members of the company. And this says a little bit more about the theater, how collaborative it is, because there is the great playwright's words, and then there is the vision of the director. And then everybody working together to make the most transcendently wonderful. They're playing homage to Shakespeare, to Anthony Cimolino, their director, and to Martha Henry, playing Prospero. You see her staff, you see her magic cloak, and she is raising the storm. She is causing this tempest, and she has help in that. And I'll show you the first helper. No, I won't. Sorry. I want you to know who's on board the ship, because Anthony Cimolino did this kind thing for us as audience to get used to these people before the tempest struck. And notice that the person seated, of course, is the King of Naples, an enemy to Prospero. The person standing with a great smile is the King of Naples' son, Ferdinand, who will have great role to play in the coming moments of the play. And then there is Trinculo, who is the clown. And the other villains, I think their backs are to us, the brother of Prospero and the brother of the King of Naples. And you have on board this ship potentially 3 different murderers. But I want you to pay attention to the gentleman in the black, the older one. I think this is the role that Shakespeare played in that first production. This is Gonzalo. He is a counselor to the king, but he is a deep and profound friend to Prospero. When they were set on this leaky boat, because they dared not shed their blood, he brought them food and water and clothing, and most important, he brought Prospero's book and books. so that they would have, wherever they ended up, they would have these things to keep them going. And I want us all to have an inner Gonzalo, because throughout the play, in the anguishes of the moment, he keeps hope going, an internal Gonzalo who will say, you know, there's a chance that we survived, maybe others, maybe the prince survived, maybe, and look at this beautiful island. Let's appreciate where we are now. So this is a wonderful, wonderful character, and his name is Gonzalo. And then the tempest hits. And see what it must have felt like. And here we're telling again, watching again what's happening, and everybody frightened, and the lightning and the St. Elmo's fire and all the rest of it. And again, so we're tempesting along here and feeling how it is. And some are shouting and some are crying and some are jumping overboard. And the sailors are staying with the ship. And miraculously, of course, when Miranda comes begging her father to please allay the storm, save the people, he assures her with the sweetest and kindest words and begins to tell her story that it's all magic, it's all right, not a single person is hurt, the ship has come to a special part of the island, has been led there, the mariners are there, they're safe, they're asleep, they're fine, the people who have landed, but they are safe and they're dry and they're separated from each other, but nevertheless there's wonder happening, and it's all for you. And that's the primary thing. This is something about the auspicious star that Prospero needs to accomplish through the working of magic. But he is making his own not easy way, a very long and poignant pathway to forgiveness. And it's a great teaching for all of us. And I'd like you to meet the magician's great helper. This is Ariel, a spirit of the air. And he is the one who describes how in the world this storm took place. He's the one that did it all. And he imitated, I'm sorry, sweetie, we've gone, yeah, we need to go back a little bit. Yeah, and then the one where Ariel describes it, okay. And this is what Prospero says to him. Now, you need to know Ariel is invisible to everybody but Prospero and us and the audience. And just because it's useful to get the words into your body, I'm going to ask you to read with me as I read these lines. And this is Prospero speaking to Ariel. Hast thou, spirit, performed to point the tempest that I bade thee? And Ariel says, to every article. I boarded the king's ship. Now notice this is how Shakespeare picked up from the writings about what happened to the Sea Venture on its voyage to the New World. Now on the beak, now in the waist, the deck, in every cabin, I flamed amazement. Sometimes I'd divide and burn in many places. On the topmast, the yards, and bowsprit, would I flame distinctly, then meet and join Jove's lightning, the precursors of the dreadful thunderclaps, more momentary in sight outrunning were not. The fire and cracks of sulphurous roaring, the most mighty Neptune seemed to besiege and make his bold waves tremble, yea, his dread trident shake. And Prospero says, my brave spirit. And so the storm is accomplished. Everybody has been brought to shore in various parts of the island, and we meet another one. Aha. This is where we enter in the 20th and 21st century, we enter into another understanding. You'll learn in this speech as we speak it. This is Caliban, a native, the one being still on the island. And again, he is the result of a sea voyage. There was a famous witch, a magician in Algiers, and she presumably did a great deal of black magic and upset the people enormously. But there's one version of the story that says that the one thing that she did meant that they would not kill her. So they put her pregnant on another leaky barge, the sailors, and carried her and dumped her at this island, and her child was born there. And that is the child, Hagseed, as he's called sometimes. And the one thing that she presumably did was to issue a curse against a pervading army, and the army lost, and saved Algiers. But anyway, so we have another sea voyage, we have another person who lives here. And let's listen to his, because he is now Prospero's slave, and he's kept in a rock, in a place that he can't get out of. Let's hear what Caliban tells us. He doesn't want to have to work. He's tired of working. They're all tired of working. I must eat my dinner. This island's mine by Sycorax my mother, which thou takest from me. When thou camest first, thou strokest me and made much of me, would give me water with berries in it, and teach me how to name the bigger light, and how the less that burn by day and night. And then I loved thee, and showed thee all the qualities of the isle, the fresh springs, brine pits, barren place, and fertile. Cursed be I that I did so. All the charms of Sycorax, toads, beetles, bats, light on you, for I am all the subjects that you have, which first was mine own king. And here you sty me in this hard rock, whilst you do keep from me the rest of the island. And Prospero says, thou most lying slave, whom stripes may move, not kindness. I want you to know, Prospero is not sweet. He's not a kind person in many ways. He's got a lot of growing to do too. I have used thee, filth as thou art, with human care, and lodged thee in mine own cell, till thou didst seek to violate the honor of my child. Would it had been done. Thou didst prevent me. I had peopled else this isle with Calibans. So that's the reason that he is now a slave, because he tried to rape the beautiful Miranda. And I need to remind you, I need to go back in my mind, sorry about this, to one of the cries that Ariel has. He's done this wonderful storm. He's done it all. And then he says, now you've been promising that I'll be free if I do this. And Prospero says, no, we've got more work to do. We've got much more work to do. And poor beautiful Ariel says, please, please, please. And then they go through the whole period of how he wants to be free as well. Now, the beautiful young prince has wandered through the land, through the island, led again by Ariel, by music. And he comes upon this young woman that Prospero's beautiful daughter, Miranda, and they meet eyes, and guess what? She doesn't know, she's never seen a young man. And she says, I might call him a thing divine, for nothing natural I ever saw so noble. And this particular actor did a beautiful thing with saying, he's speaking, most sure the goddess on whom these airs, this music attend, vouchsafe my prayer may know if you remain upon this island, and that you will some good instruction give how I may bear me here. My prime request, which I do last pronounce is, oh, you wonder if you be maid or no? No wonder, sir, but certainly a maid. My language, heavens. So this is the love at first sight. But because Prospero is not totally trusting, because this is the prince, the son of his enemy, and they each believe the other is dead or has been drowned. But this is the enemy's son, the Prince of Naples. And so Prospero says, and it is a tradition in Elizabethan worlds and Jacobean worlds, that if you really love a woman, you've got to go through an ordeal. And so Prospero makes him a slave for a while, and he makes him carry logs. And he's got a huge number of logs. And of course, Miranda is forbidden to see him, but Miranda makes her way to him. And they declare in no uncertain terms their love and love and love and love. But that's a little farther to come. But it happened immediately. And this was one of the things that Prospero could not have predicted, but had to be exactly the most wonderful thing that could possibly happen, and part of the achievement of his great and beautiful plan, desire, need for her to be cared for. All right. And there are other people, others lost on the island, and I'll show you. Okay, remember the clown that you saw with that's Trinculo. And the one in the middle is the butler, and the only thing he has saved from the ship is liquor. He's a drunken butler, and they come upon Caliban, who is working, and a storm has come, so they've covered themselves in the thing. It is the great Shakespearean comedy piece that has an undertone of threat and anguish. This play, I think, has more curse words in it than any play ever written, and they are quite colorful. But Caliban drinks the liquor, and here we have another note struck about what happens to native peoples when they are introduced to liquor. And he declares then that the drunken butler is his king, and all they need to do to take charge of the island is to kill Prospero. There they go. Okay, and the butler will be the king, and Trinculo will be the lord, and Caliban will be restored to his rightful place. And so they create this crazy plot to kill Prospero. And Caliban says, I don't care how you do it anyway. And he has this hideous speech. And then 50 lines later, when there is music and sound all around them, he has the most beautiful lines in the play and the most heartbreaking. So let's say them together, because there's music in the drunken men, and Caliban is drunk also at this point, totally. And they're concerned about the sounds they're hearing. And let's read together, because you need to get these words into your body, into your throat, and hear your own voice saying them. Be not afeared. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometime voices that if I then had waked after long sleep will make me sleep again. And then in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again. The most beautiful lines in the play, spoken by this freckled whelp. Only Shakespeare could do that. And we have now what has happened to the others, the enemies, the king of Naples, the good Gonzalo, Sebastian, the king's brother, Antonio, Prospero's brother. They've all been wandering around complaining. Gonzalo has been trying to keep the king's heart up because the king is convinced his son is drowned. And the others are tormenting him and being as nasty as possible. And then suddenly Ariel puts everybody but the two wicked ones to sleep. And the two wicked ones begin to plot how if they kill the king of Naples and Gonzalo right now, then they will somehow make their way back to where they were. And the brother will be the new king. And Milan will be freed of its tribute to Naples. So they have this hideous plot going. And then suddenly appears this feast. And then as they're about to eat the feast, this harpy appears. And there again is Ariel. And this is the accusation speech to these three. You are three men of sin, whom destiny that hath to instrument this lower world and what is in it, the never surfeited sea hath caused to belch up you. And on this island where man doth not inhabit, you, mongst men, being most unfit to live, I have made you mad. And even with such like valor men hang and drown their proper selves. Thou fools, I and my fellows are ministers of fate. And they disperse into the mud, into the swamps, and even the king of Naples is weeping with sorrow, both for his lost son and also for what he has done, what he did, what he contrived to do to Prospero. The others are not so repentant, but they are all dispersed about the island. But back at the cell, Prospero has allowed Ferdinand to complete his ordeal and says to them, let's read it together. If I have too austerely punished you, your compensation makes amends, for I have given you here a third of mine own life, and that for which I live. And that's the truth. He lives to see her made safe and given her proper due. And once again I tender to thy hand. All thy vexations were but my trials of thy love, and thou hast strangely stood the test. Here, afore heaven, I ratify this rich gift, O Ferdinand. Do not smile at me that I boast of her, for thou shalt find she will outstrip all praise and make it halt behind her. And Ferdinand said, I do believe it against an oracle. Then as my gift and thine own acquisition worthily purchased, take my daughter. And one of the things that I believe is a step on Prospero's path of forgiveness are the words that he has said to Ariel in an earlier moment, because Ariel again is invisible. He's about to put on a show. That's what we're preparing for here. Be prepared to see the great goddess Juno appear. But before that, I need to tell you one thing, because I think that helped Prospero begin to open his own heart to something possible, something new and strange. Ariel is invisible to everybody, but it has been watching the way the lovers are. And the words they've said to each other, and they're yearning to touch each other and all of that. And he's puzzled. He's the spirit of the air. He's puzzled. And he says finally, in addition to other things, to Prospero, do you love me, master? No. And something is born of awareness in Prospero, whose only love has been for his books and for his daughter. And he responds, realizing, dearly, dearly, Ariel. So a new kind of awareness of love, and therefore empathy for the fact that Ariel wants only to be free to the air again. And something in that response opens Prospero to a new possibility. And now, because we want to make sure that this is a wedding toward, we're going to have a wedding here. These people are lovers and they are wedding. And so Ariel and all his friends and allies in the spirit realm and the sprite realm and the nymphs realm put on a show. They put on this magnificent pageant and they call the goddesses forth. And here is Juno. Notice all those peacock feathers. And this is one of the great actors of the festival. And here's a brief piece of what she says. Honor, riches, marriage blessing, long continuance and increasing. Hourly joys be still upon you. Juno sings her blessings on you. And she promises them happiness and well-being, and they sit entranced, of course. And then here is the goddess Ceres, the goddess of plenty. We call her in the Greek world Demeter. But yeah, you see how the costumer went all out for this production. And she says, earth's increase and voice and plenty, barns and garners never empty, vines with clustering bunches growing, plants with goodly burden bowing, spring come to you at the farthest in the very end of harvest. Scarcity and want shall shun you. Ceres' blessing so is on you. And there is the bridal couple, the bride and groom, as they are about to be announced, receiving the blessing of the goddess of plenty. And then the goddesses call forth a dance. They ask all the people, they ask all the people who are doing the harvest, the men who are doing the harvest, and all the nymphs from the sea to come and do this dance. And this is this vast, beautiful pageant celebrating the wedding that is about to be, that somehow it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And in the middle of it, Prospero remembers that Trinculo, Stefano, and Caliban are coming to kill him. And so he's got to do something. So he has some other work for Ariel to do. And he says this, I had forgot the foul conspiracy of the beast Caliban and his confederates against my life. The minute of their plot is almost come. Well done, avoid no more. So and they all disappear. You do look, my son, in a moved sword, as if you were dismayed. Be cheerful, sir. Now, I want everybody, please, to read this with me. Our revels now are ended. These our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. So we hear the dream and the sleep of life again. Sir, I am vexed, bear with my weakness. And he goes forth to deal with the crazy, drunken, would-be murderers. And I'm going to end my piece there. This is at the place I like to play a game with Shakespeare's plays and measure the golden mean, the moment where the golden mean, where most of the play, where something changes in the course of the play, something happens, and the tide turns. And this is just before this great pageant is presented, is where the tide turns, when Prospero gives Miranda to Ferdinand and has his own heart open to a new kind of empathy and love. And we will continue this excitement and the wondrous step all the way to forgiveness when we meet again in April, celebrating great books, the great book of the folio, the great book that Prospero loved, and the great book that is the Tempest, and how the storms of life turn us into something new and strange, something rich and strange. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Peggy. You created the Tempest. I hadn't known till this lecture that its connection with Jamestown in Virginia. That's quite extraordinary.
Well,
Kind
it's
of
James's town, formed, and they were in such straits. And while this play is, he definitely Shakespeare was always interested in storms, and he's not a couple of the plays. There big storms happen and people are shipwrecked and so forth. But this was the big one, and there's no doubt that he had access to Strachey's document about what happened. And what's interesting to me is that some of the people stayed in Bermuda. I mean, this miraculous rescue in Bermuda, and some of them rebuilt out of Bermudan oak 2 other ships and made their way to the New World. And so, but the people who stayed included John Rolfe, who stayed in Bermuda, but his wife at the time and child died there. I mean, death was right next door all the time in this world. And then he went back to Virginia and married Pocahontas. And it's really interesting because, I mean, you can get every piece of any great story, you can take it and go wandering off with it, to find other things. But he set up this huge tobacco, and the Indian time was relatively peaceful at that time, but didn't last. But anyway, this huge tobacco thing, and King James hated tobacco. And so he taxed the heck out of it. It was a really ferocious desire in England to have, they were all addicted to tobacco. So he put up this big tax on it, this excise tax. So that's how he got over his hatred, by getting richer by the import of tobacco. But it all came from Virginia, from John Rolfe's world. And this huge thing. But so many of the people in Jamestown died, and they thought it would be like the other lost colonies, that they would just disappear and nobody would ever know what happened. But Jamestown, a few people survived. Some were leaving. Jamestown is up the James River a little ways, and some of them were leaving again. There were like 80 of them left, and they were leaving, and then another ship arrived with help. So, and there'd been some wonderful books about how they couldn't adapt to the new world. They wanted it to be the old world, but
it sounds like today.
Yes, very like
this
today.
Pandemic, and we were supposed to create a new world, and everybody's thinking, let's get back to normal, whatever normal is, as soon as possible.
Well, there is no normal anymore. And we have to keep adapting, and that's what Shakespeare's people did, because he lived in a time of almost, I mean, the plague hit every time it felt like it, and they had to write great plays while they couldn't perform them.
Well, good. Well, I'm going to be looking for all the doctoral students here to raise your hand and make a comment or question for Peggy. And as you're thinking about what you're going to contribute, Peggy, I'd love to just inquire more deeply into your passion around Shakespeare. I mean, how old were you when you discovered Shakespeare, and why is it that Shakespeare speaks so powerfully to you, and I guess through you, that you dedicated a good part of your life to being a Shakespearean actor? I mean, what is it about Shakespeare that speaks so profoundly?
Well, I'm hoping you talk a little bit about that in April. And I was a teenager, and for some reason, one summer I decided to read all the plays. And it was several years later, actually in college, that I realized they were intended to make sense. that there was a language there that could be devised. And I had absolute, at the University of Texas, I had the great, enormous fortune of having as a teacher Be-Iden Payne. And Mr. Payne is one of the people who was inspired by William Pohl in the 1880s and said, you've got to do Shakespeare in a different way. We've got to do it the way he did it, on a bare stage, and let the words do the job for you. And so, and don't do it without interruption. Because in, you know, the 1880s, they had thousands and thousands of sets, and it was an hour and a half between acts, and they only got to do pieces of the play. So William Pohl was inspired Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne was a director at the Royal Shakespeare in Stratford for some years, but he came to the United States. He taught at Carnegie Mellon and did Shakespeare that way. And then he came, and in the summertime taught at the university. We're also tied to each other. It's incredible. He taught at the University of Washington, where a gentleman by the name of Angus Bomer went to school in the summertime. He was a school teacher, but he was doing master's work in the summertime. And he and Mr. Payne did productions with Mr. Payne. And he said to Mr. Payne, this needs to be written about. And Mr. Payne, no, it needs to be done. And so in 1935, Mr. Angus Bomer, now a teacher at what was then Southern Oregon Normal School in Ashland, Oregon, noticed that there was a thing left over from the years of the Chautauqua, a hawk, if you will, of what could be a stage. And with the help of the WPA and other people, they put up a stage and did the show. They did, and that began the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So, and this production, somebody asked a question. This was done in 2018 at Stratford, Ontario, and you can buy the DVD of it, see it on the biggest screen you can get, and you can also get a DVD from the Stratford Festival of Christopher Plummer's Prospero in 2010. So Mr. Payne, to me, okay, as a student of his. And then my first husband, we were actors, and so we wanted to come here, and so we got to come here. So it keeps growing, and it never ends. I say that if I want to think of the word infinite, I think of William Shakespeare. And because it never stops, it never stops. And there's fairly recent and very beautiful studies of what he does for the brain. And I'll talk a little bit about that if there's time sometime, but it's really.
So that reading Shakespeare or listening to Shakespeare actually affects your brain.
Absolutely, absolutely, in a good way, and making the stretch. One of my favorite lines in Prospero's opening discussion of his past and his pains, he asks Miranda, and he's asking her if she remembers anything before they came to the island. In the dark, backward, and abysm of time. Wow. And those are words that mean when you were a little girl, long time ago. And
well, you know, this is so interesting, Peggy, because one of the great art collectors and historians, Jan Meer in Brussels, has written extensively on this whole question of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And his assertion is that it is not, that a masterpiece is recognized as a masterpiece because it actually triggers certain places in the brain that aren't triggered when you see kind of normal art. So if you think, for example, the Mona Lisa, you know, the Mona Lisa just isn't the Mona Lisa, and we all kind of like it because we're told it's a beautiful painting, yeah. But it became recognized globally because it almost, a masterpiece almost releases endorphins in the brain that activate your aesthetic sensibility in a particularly refined way. And I thought about that in terms of art, but I never thought about that in terms of Shakespeare. But of course, you're correct.
Well,
I'm sure.
there's a wonderful scholar in England named Philip Davis who's got a book called Shakespeare Thinking and the Shakespeare Brain and all of, and he cites the studies that are made with what happens when you hear him turn an adverb like the dark backward, an abyss of time, abysm, not abyss, abysm of time. He turns nouns, he uses verbs more. He turns nouns into verbs. He turns adverbs into nouns. He shifts the language. And one of the standard jokes in the Shakespeare world is that he uses like 26,000 words, and the King James Version of the Bible only has 12,000, which proves Shakespeare's smarter than God. That's what one of the directors of I think the Shakespeare in London used to say, or that it just, and people came to listen for the new word, or the way he was using the word. So, and they were an oral culture, so that they listened. They knew how to listen, and we have less listening skills than they had, for sure.
Right. Our attention span is much shorter today. My goodness. Well, thank you. Let's turn to some of our students here. Jonathan Macleod, your hand is up. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, first of all, wow, how I have a million things going through my head all the way through this. And I'm very grateful for the presentation. Thank you very much. There's a couple of notices and then a question. The notice is, I find this story so fascinating because there's an ontological piece and there's an epistemological piece, right? So the ontological piece of this is the actual journey, the people on a journey and getting, from the news feed, right? This is what happened. And then there's an epistemological piece, which is how humans use what's between their ears in order to come to a relationship with nature in order to fulfill the existential statement, which is to remain alive, right? Okay, job one, stay alive. Well, how do I get that done? Which is the epistemological piece. But what's beautiful about this is these two things, both the what happened and sort of the nature of the relationship with what happened, lead to this arrival at a transformation piece, right? Transformation piece for Prospero that transcends the what happened and sort of the why that it happened. And the outcome, you put it all in the blender and whiz it around, and the outcome is this love and forgiveness piece, right? Which is
good one, Jonathan.
Ordinary result from a shipwreck, sort of. And I love that piece, and I also love the piece about how it affects the brain. And that'll definitely show up in my paper because I've done a lot of research on that. But even since ancient Rome, there's a beautiful book written about the effects of art in ancient Rome. And there's passages and passages in this ancient text that say, be careful the images that you show certain people because they sort of can't unsee them, right? And the effects, the precipitates of the viewing or participation in this art form, whether it be perhaps the Mona Lisa or experiencing the grandeur of a Shakespearean play, you can't unhear it and you're forever changed. And what I guess my question then is to say, would it be wondrous, and do you think it's actionable, that something like this could be reframed in a modern society to precipitate the same transformation in people? Because certainly the big lie is available, and certainly shipwrecks are around every day, whether they're metaphorical or otherwise. How would you say that we can, as individuals and as a society, and even as peers and colleagues, precipitate this actionable thing into the future?
Oh, Jonathan, that was a question worthy of a PhD. Well done, man.
Just remember that when you read the post paper, please. Thank you very much.
Peggy.
Jonathan, thank you. And thank you for the beautiful context that you have created. You've just done it, you know, you've just done it. Through the power of your words and the power of your thought and the power of the translations of your thought into such beautiful words and such intense words. And for today, I think, again, I want us to take Gonzalo into our hearts. He's the one that has the speech about the golden age, and it's an innocent speech, and it's not going to work, and people make fun of him while he's saying it. But he knows people's blemishes, and he knows their deep sins, as Ariel calls it. But he still keeps the kindness. He's the one that rescued Prospero. And as we will learn in the next piece of the play, when Ariel reports that all of them are lost and weeping and sad, and the poor old man Gonzalo, whom you have spoken of so much, the tears are running down his face. And that's where the big turn is, that everybody says is in the play. And that I would have cried for him if I were human, says Ariel, in better words than that. I don't have them exact. And that's when Prospero says, you would weep for him, and you're not even a human. What can I do then? What kind of person am I if I cannot also weep for them? I like to think of that. It's a tricky thing to quote Macbeth, but the pity like a naked newborn babe is one of Macbeth's lines that just through your body. So I guess the longest way around would be, the shortest way around is very long, yakety yak, would be simply to hold to the whatever your idea of a golden age might be. And whether it's simply kindness or supplying people with good things or trying to keep cheer. The bosun, whom they're so cruel to in many ways. The bosun's first words are what cheer, and all through the first scene. And we never hear those words, of course, because the storm is so loud, and in any production you can't hear it. And the mariners all say, all lost, to prayers, all lost. And then, but he always says, stay cheerful, cheerily my hearts, move it, we can do this. So there's kind of a combination of the cheerleader part. We can survive, we can do this, we know how to do this, we are in charge here. And the one who keeps the heart going, no matter what the circumstances, with kindness. Mm. And to see that in through all our world's uncertainties with some trust in providence, divine providence, and that auspicious star, looking for the auspicious. I don't know, I'm not making any sense, but I love thinking about what you just said, Jonathan.
Good, wonderful, thank you. I don't know if you can still hear me, but it's a lovely sentiment, and I do believe that, you know, optimism is an underrated and underserved commodity that we can all trade upon as peers and as colleagues. So I'm very grateful for your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now, Crystal Steinberg. Crystal, welcome.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here because this play is my favorite Shakespearean play, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to facilitate learning with it with students when I taught in high school. And in just connecting with what John was speaking about, I think you could find all kinds of examples of not only Shakespeare's work, but the Greek plays, Antigone, done in high schools, revamped in contemporary contexts by the students. And I always found when I was teaching Shakespeare, I had a little gateway where I would take something that the students loved and show a film of it so that they could see. I taught in an all boys Jesuit school. They could see how it was changed in the film so that they would learn watching the film wasn't viewing or reading Shakespeare's play. So that would be our introduction moving into Shakespeare, because they would just be very upset with the changes made in the film. And then when we moved to the play, they would always take a scene from the play and put it into contemporary context. And it was amazing to me. And this grew year to year to them doing things in parks. And once the students were stopped by police officers and they were asking what they were doing, and then they incorporated the officers into their revision of the scene. So I really think there's a lot of potential in John's question. I'm working on library community gatherings to create something similar to what South Africa created post-apartheid in the healing workshops, where they would perform plays of what had happened. They would create art for the homily in the end, and they would play drums together to show how they could work together. And I was just thinking with John's comment, how Shakespearean plays could be community plays revised. And this question, how can we begin Zalo today, could be the fruit of that experience. So I'm just really excited and inspired by what you shared today, and want to thank you for keeping Shakespeare alive in our hearts and our minds. And I was going to ask you about, since Helen Mirren played Prospero in that film, it seems that there's been a lot of release for that female role. I've seen that done with Taming of the Shrew too, where Kate and Petruchio switch roles. And I was going to ask what you think about that, because I was playing with the idea of the play in terms of humans being colonizers of the earth, just because of what we're experiencing now with climate change and how we've interacted with other species as if they're just things for us to use. So I'm wondering how you might see that as human beings, as colonizers, not only of nations, but of the planet.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your work, Crystal, for doing this for students and in the world. And the thought about plays as a way of bringing some kind of healing power. And certainly we did inherit, those of us in the United States did inherit an English, to some extent, an English point of view, which has served us in some ways and been a profound disservice in many others. So the whole colonizing the earth is, I think, I think it's too big a subject for me to know what to do with or how to think about it, except to make amends in any way we can for the harm we've done, both to other beings, other people, and to the trees and to the land, and ask forgiveness. Ask forgiveness. I think your work is wonderful, and just for the fun of it, I recently reread Margaret Atwood's wonderful book called Hagseat, about doing Shakespeare in prisons.
Yes.
Huge other a number of things. There's a wonderful book by another woman who has done, it's an account of the work she's done in prisons, called Shakespeare Saved My Life. And what she did was hand one of Richard II's speeches to people in maximum security lockdown.
Beautiful.
and it saved their lives in many ways. So it's a wonderful book. So Shakespeare's everywhere.
Yes.
And as I said earlier, we all have our own Shakespeare, and I'm so glad that you've embraced yours and know so wisely how to offer that to others. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. And I see all the things that you say that we can do in terms of colonizing the earth in this play. So thank you.
Oh, good. Set them free. Set the world free. Hi ho, freedom, freedom, freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Jonathan. That might be a good place to draw this to a close, Peggy. But as you can see, your rendition of Shakespeare's Tempest, The Tempest, has been really sublime and inspiring. And really want to thank you for that. And I think the comment that you made with Jonathan's question about what qualities are the most salient for today in terms of optimism and generosity of spirit and a willingness to make our way through no matter what we're encountering is really good advice. And it exemplifies the nature of a great book. You know, whether you're in a pandemic or you're in Jamestown, Virginia, trying to grow tobacco 400 years ago, a play like The Tempest will speak to you in ways that will resonate through the cultural prisms of your time. You know, and that's so amazing that you can even be in, you know, solitary confinement in a lockdown ward in a major prison and read Shakespeare, and your life can be transformed. That's the essential quality of a great book, and comes back to the point that you were making. It's a great book not because we think it is. It's a great book because it is, and there's something in our neural recognition system that understands it intuitively when we encounter it. It's a very powerful thought to think, everyone, that when you read The Tempest, you're encountering a masterpiece intelligence that is actually going to activate certain areas of your brain and probably your heart and gut that will be inherently transformational. It's a very powerful thought. So thank you for that, Peggy. I can hardly wait for next month, but it's be the same time, same station, everyone. The second Tuesday of April at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So thank you, Peggy.
Oh, thank you for letting me do this and the opportunity to do this. And just everybody, please read Shakespeare out loud, get it in your body, wiggle around while you're doing it, move while you're doing it. It really, that's where the mystery works. And listen for music. Okay.
Beautiful.
Try to.
Thank you so much. See
Thank
you
you.
all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.